Uh, Before I start today, yesterday when I asked what are your interests, you have a really varied interest, all of you. Okay, different, same problem, but you look at your interests come from different sides. Now, one of the things I would like to do with you perhaps on Thursday is those of you who have a serious question, you ask me instead of me talking, you ask me. So, I will check. If you don't have a question, no problem. Okay. But those of you who have a serious question to ask or not so serious question, but something, some burning question you have to ask, on Thursday we will spend at least half a day just responding to your questions, whatever you may have in mind, whatever discussed in the, as Dr. Gupta said, whatever we discussed, whatever we did not discuss, right? It does not have to be. As long as related to water, as long as wastewater or urban, we will try to answer. We will go from one by one and see how far we go. So, think about anything you want us to ask. If I can't ask and if it is too difficult, I will hand it over to Dr. Gupta. So, that is one. Number two, those of you who are in the Kharagpur leave in the library a copy of our Singapore water story. So, you can read in details on Singapore water story, and this will be available in about 4 months time. All of you read English, so I do not have to worry about it, but if you want a copy in Hindi, Government of India has translated it in Hindi. So, you will have a Hindi version of this in about 4 months time. Okay. Now, yesterday one of the questions someone asked after the class, why should we worry about Singapore? Why should you think what Singapore has done? It's only 5.7 million people. We have in India 1.3 over 1.3 billion people. So, what's the relevance of Singapore to India, big country? Singapore has 3 major group of people, the Chinese, Malay and Indians. In India, we speak 30 languages, more than 30 languages, God knows how many dialects. So, what is the relevance? The question, again, it's a serious question. What is the relevance of Singapore to India? Okay. Now, the reason we picked up Singapore are many. First, in 1965, Singapore's water supply, believe it or not, was worse than Delhi. Okay. In 1965, worse than Delhi. 20 years down the day, by 1985, it became one of the best in the world, not in Asia, not in Southeast Asia, one of the best in the world. So, the question is, if a city in 1965 had a worse water supply than Delhi, how in 20 years it managed to get to be one of the best in the world? Okay? Because these type of issues you will not find any textbook, because I have been scratching my head what made Singapore so special, so that the city managed to solve its problem. Why can't Delhi solve its problem, or Chennai or Mumbai or Kharagpur solve its problem? What a problem. I gave it a great deal of thought, and the only thing I came to the conclusion, the most important thing I came to the conclusion, that Singapore had a prime minister who realized water is not only an existential issue, but also water is very important for economic development. Without water, you can't have any form of economic development. Okay? And Kuan Yew, the first prime minister, and he was from 1965 to 1992, he was prime minister throughout, and he was elected. If he lost 4 seats in the election, he thought that was a big defeat to the party. Okay? 4 seats. Why he became interested in water? But he realized from the beginning that water, without water, Singapore not only cannot survive, it cannot go anywhere. And so, as Cecilia was telling you yesterday, that when the Japanese came to invade the Singapore, the British commander blew out the bridge, and below the bridge was all the water that was coming from Malaysia. I asked him, why is he the only prime minister in the entire world who in the last 50 years has been consistently interested in water, Okay. I do not know one single prime minister, one single chief minister of any of the Indian states who is interested in water in good times and bad times. If there is a big flood, water is the top of the political priority for all of 2 to 3 weeks, okay, until the flood goes. Flood goes, finish, interest vanishes, completely vanishes. Same with drought. You have a drought, drought is over, the interest of the prime minister, chief minister, or any minister disappears. Water is not important. And yet, if you want to solve water problem, including urban water problem, you can't solve with a flood. You cannot solve with a drought. You have to plan for it. You have to implement it. You have to make sure throughout that things are working out well. There has to be strong political support. But no country in the world except in Singapore gave that political support consistently. When Singapore became independent, or it really didn't become independent, the Federation of Malaya, of which Singapore was a part, decided to keep Singapore out. So, Singapore didn't want independence. In fact, if you look into YouTube, you find that in 1965, when Singapore became independent, Kuan Yew on the television literally crying, saying that we wanted to remain in Malaya, we have remained in Malaya, but we have no choice, they don't want us. So, Malaya was a big country, Federation of Malaya. So, if they don't want a small island, there's nothing they can do. And Malaya was under the impression that if we kick Singapore out, in 2 years' time they will come back and say, can I please join you under any conditions. Okay? So, they will have a much better control on Singapore, except they misjudged the quality of this man. I will come to that in a minute. So, in 1965, when Singapore became independent and British were in charge of both Singapore and Malaya, they were the colonial masters of the both. So, just immediately after independence, the British High Commissioner called Kuan Yew and said, can I come and see you? And of course, he said, please. And British High Commissioner at that time was a gentleman called Head. He said, that Yesterday I saw Tunku Abdul Rahman, the Prime Minister of Malaysia, or became Malaysia. He said, I saw the Prime Minister, and he said, from now on, Singapore's foreign policy, domestic policy, primarily foreign policy, must be what we dictate Singapore to be. If they don't follow what we are telling Singapore to follow, we will simply cut off the water, of its water from Malaysia. So that is what he told the British High Commissioner. And Tunku was a very clever man, Prime Minister of Malaysia, very clever man. He knew if he said that to the British High Commissioner, next day High Commissioner will convey this message to the Chief Minister or the Prime Minister of Singapore. Exactly that happened. It was an important issue. He came to Lee Kuan Yew, Mr. Ambassador Head, High Commissioner Head came to Lee Kuan Yew, told him this is the situation. Okay. And he told me, as soon as he left, as soon as the High Commissioner left his office, he asked his staff, find me the 3 best water experts in Singapore. He said, immediately find me 3 best experts in Singapore, and scheduled the next day only discussion with him, nothing else. And when the 3 experts came, he asked them a few questions. He said, this is your responsibility. Tell me, how much rain falls in Singapore in 1 year? I want to know how much rain falls in 1 year. Number 2, of that rainfall, how much can we collect? Okay. Number 3, is the technology available to make us as self-sufficient in water as possible? He said, money is no object, but time is critical. I want to know immediately how much rain falls, how much can we collect, and how much can we use. Then what he did is they went to do their homework. In the meantime, he put another 3 people in charge in his office, that any policy Singapore does, industrial policy, economic policy, any other policy, first thing they have to do is to say what are their water implications. Okay. He said water drives all other policies. He says, oh, and he used this expression, all other policies bend in the knees for water. So, if you have an industrial policy, before that policy is approved, he wants to know what are the implications on water. Cecilia mentioned yesterday that Singapore wanted to be self-sufficient in pig meat, because approximately 70% of Singapore are Chinese, and their favorite meat is pig meat. And so, Singapore had limited land. When they became independent, only area they wanted to be self-sufficient, only area they, in terms of food, they wanted to be self-sufficient is pig, rearing pig. They did all types of work. They didn't have enough land. So, one of the thought was, well, we will build a high rise for the pigs only, 30-story buildings, all pigs. First floor, second floor, third floor, 5th floor, 20th floor. So, they are not going to take land, we will give them feed, but we will produce a lot of pigs in this high story building. So, that was fine, it solved the land problem, but then they found out, as Cecilia mentioned yesterday, what to do with the pig waste. In fact, my first interaction with Singapore was in 1980. Early 19, can I have a little bit of water? Yes, early 1980. Thank you. When UNDP, that time Singapore was not rich, so he was getting UNDP projects, and they had asked UNDP to bring some experts to tell them how do we get rid of the pig waste. So, that a big project on managing pig waste. So that was my first introduction to Singapore. I went there to look at the damn pigs and see what we can do with the waste. The problem with the pig waste is it's extremely concentrated. You got all types of bacteria and God knows how many things. And you have, when you have thousands and thousands of pigs which produce a lot of waste, how do you get rid of them? After about 3 or 4 years of research, we had to tell them that, sorry, we can't solve it. There's no way. Only way you can do is leave the pig waste, they dry up, the rain comes, go down the groundwater, go down in your rivers, but there's nothing very much we can do. And Singapore is an interesting country, and Kuan Yew is a very interesting country. He believed in no ism. He was neither a capitalist, nor a communist, nor nothing. He was a very pragmatic person. And his thesis was, development is a very complex issue. For a country to develop, for a city state to develop, is very complex. You think this is the best policy, but after 3-4 years down the lane, you find out for a variety of reasons, it doesn't work. And pig farming was one of those bright ideas. They thought the Chinese like pig, their main meat source of protein was pig, so we'll be self-sufficient in food, nothing else. In pig meat, nothing else. But when he found out we can't rear pigs without affecting the quality of water supply, his decision was immediate. He said, immediately he said, if we can't, water is our lifeline. Okay? We can survive without rearing pigs in Singapore, but we cannot survive without a good quality water in Singapore. So, point number 1, all the pig farming from immediate effect will be banned from Singapore, banned. No pigs can be reared in Singapore. If you are a pig farmer and you had a bunch of pigs, they will not only compensate you generously for the pigs, they will make sure you get an alternate livelihood, because you are a pig farmer, you don't know what else to do. Okay? So, government took on to you to train you to earn a living in some other area, but no pig farming. Okay? So, that is the issue with Singapore. Very pragmatic, very direct, and a very different country. People ask me, what's the difference between India and Singapore? A lot of people come from India to learn from Singapore. I tell them you can't learn from Singapore. You can learn many lessons, like in the water management, urban water management. One of the lessons we can learn from Singapore, you need consistent top level political interest. Okay? Singapore River, as Cecilia said yesterday, is a small river, less than 4 kilometers long. Okay? In India, less than 4 kilometers long, I don't think you'll call it even a river. Okay? Maybe a nala, maybe something else, but not a river. But that is their biggest river, and that was the lifeline, and that is where the trade was being done, and it was extremely polluted. And Kuan Yew said, we have to clean up the river. So, he told his bureaucrats, we have to clean up the river. And I have to tell you, bureaucrats are the same here, same in Singapore. They had meetings and meetings and meetings, and then nothing was being done. So, Kuan Yew one day said, what is your problem? I said, sir, it's too expensive. To clean it up is too expensive. We think we shouldn't do it. He said, okay, that's what you said. I have taken your advice under advisement. Here is my decisions. You have 10 years to clean up the Singapore River, 10 years, starting from now. Tell me how much money. You go home, do your homework, tell me how much money you need, we will provide you that money. So, you do not worry about the cost. Your task as a bureaucrats, clean up the river 10 years, not one day more, 10 years, clear it up. Whatever money you need, as long as they are justified, that money is available. Okay? And he said, bring me the plan immediately, how much money you need, what you are going to do. And from today, prepare a work plan from now for the 10 years, for every month, okay, every month. So, you give me this month, let us say this is May, end of May you will do this much work. So, on first week of June I want a report on my desk saying what you have achieved in May. Have you met your target? If you have met the target, I am quite happy, I do not want to know anything else. Okay? You are doing okay. If you have not met your target, I want to know why you have not met the target and how are you going to make up the time, because you are not getting more than 10 years. So, if you are already behind progress in the first few months, how are you going to make it up? So, I want all this. And he said, and some of the people who are still alive, they told me if they did not meet the target, the tongue lashing they got in the public from the Prime Minister was incredible. He could be really tough. So, they knew not only he was interested, but he was keeping an eye on what he was doing. Okay. So, the bureaucrats who said it was too expensive, cannot be done, it is not cost effective, but they finished the work within 10 years within budget. Neither the time exceeded nor the budget was exceeded. Now, they said, the bureaucrats said that it is not cost effective. Cleaning up Singapore River, you will spend more money, but you do not get the benefit. Anyone now who looks at Singapore will realize that probably nobody has done the study, but my guess is for every dollar they have spent for cleaning up the river, they probably got $25 back. I mean, the cost effectiveness is tremendous. If you now want to go the most prosperous part of Singapore, the business district, everything, it is on the Singapore River, on the banks of Singapore River, which was a slum before. And the same thing happened like the pig farmers. The people who lived on the slums on the two banks of the Singapore River, there had no water supply, no supply of water, they had no toilet, no sanitation, they just dumped everything in the Singapore River, no electricity in their houses. They lived in a very poor conditions, and this is not very long ago. I am talking of this about 1970, 75. So, he said, we have to clean up Singapore River, we have to relocate all the shanty towns on both sides of the river. Again, the government of Singapore compensated them, and the good thing in Singapore is his legal side is very fast. Okay. If you complain saying, if you went to the court, it is not like India, it will take 20 years, the cases go. Maximum 1 week, problem solved. Okay. So, those who went to the court looked at it, if they thought the compensation was not enough, they fixed the compensation, end of the story. But all the shanty town was moved, and that is when they created, one of the things they created, what they call the Housing Development Board, HDB. And all these people, for them, high-rise buildings were built. They went from a shanty town to a modern building, with all the facilities. And he said, you know, he told me, we interviewed extensively for this book. He told us that the only people who have consistently voted against his party only people, consistently. He said throughout, he was prime minister from 65 to 1992. He said only people who consistently voted against the party were the people whom he removed from the slums on the Singapore River to much better living conditions. The children were educated, provided education, they became doctors, lawyers, and possible, but they consistently voted because they felt they had a more interesting lifestyle in the slum. Nostalgically, they thought they were living very well. They had no toilet, no water, no electricity, but they thought, and no education, but they thought life was heavenly on those slums. And this is again human being, the way we think. We always think past is more romantic, more admirable from this. But anyway, the reason I am saying this is the lesson we learned from Singapore is the most important one, we need strong political support. Would Singapore be where it is today? No way without Lee Kuan Yew's strong hand. He said things have to be done. I don't want excuses. And water was his top priority. So every policy, if you have a land use policy, he wanted to know what are the implications on water. And if he was not happy the water part is not properly done, that land use policy goes back to the drawing board. Same with the industrial policy. So we don't know any country which, or any province in India where the chief minister or the prime minister has consistently interest in water. So when somebody tells me there's nothing to learn from Singapore, I'm saying many things. Number one, Singapore may be very different from India, but many of the processes through which they created a country or a city state or whatever you wish to call, which is to be admired, which is to be envied, we can learn from them. One, in the water area, number one is we need strong political support, strong, consistent political support. Now, I won't mention any names, but just let me give you an example, because at least a couple of you are from that state. Last year, I received a call from one of the chief minister of one of the Indian states. He wanted me to come immediately. He said, can you please come on the next flight possible, because our people are suffering for lack of water. Really serious problem. And I told him that, look, you are calling me saying drop everything, come. I don't know you, I have never worked for you, I don't owe you anything. You are asking me to drop everything, come, that is not possible. I have to look at my calendar. I have some conditions. If I go, I want to know, number one, I am not going there for a sightseeing trip. So, I want to have your time available. I do not want to sit outside your office waiting for you to find some time to see me. I want concrete appointment with you, your minister, water minister, the chief engineer, who have you, all of them lined up, so that I spend 3-4 days together with all of you, and all of you are available on those 3 or 4 days. I don't want to go there and then your secretary starts calling, said, aha, can you see this gentleman? No, no, no. You have to prepare everything, you have to get all the data available, and I go take a look, and then we see whether we can do business together or not. He says, please come as early as possible. Okay? And I told him that within a couple of days I will send you an email saying when I can come. I sent an email the next day saying this is the time period I could come. It was about 4 or 5 weeks after our discussion. 3 weeks later, I had had nothing from him, absolutely nothing, no response to the email. So I called his office, and his PA said, sir, I've been trying to get a date from the chief minister, but he's too busy, he can't give you a date. Okay? So I said, if the chief minister one day is so interested in water, he wants you to come immediately because people are suffering or blah blah blah, dying, the animals are in a bad shape. 3 weeks, no response. Then I said, what about the other people? Sir, he said, until I get the chief minister clearance, we can't do anything. Okay. He said, but that is not a problem. He said, he has already announced to the media that one of the world's leading experts is coming to solve the water problem. Okay. Only thing I can tell you is I never got a response from this gentleman ever. One day he was hot on solving the problem. I don't know whether he trained or what happened. The interest completely evaporated. You cannot run a water management system where the people at the top are not interested. That is one of the lessons we learned from the Singapore water story, that you need strong political commitment, because there are a lot of things involved in urban water management. And if you do not have support from the top side, only thing you can do is to do something in the margin. You can't do much there. So lesson number one, or the reason I am saying Singapore water is, there are many things to learn from the Singapore experience. There are many things we cannot do. What Singapore has done, Indian cities cannot do. Just to give you an example, because last 6 years I have been working closely. Our first involvement was with the government of Singapore in a very strange way. United Nations Development Program did a human development report in 2006. The whole report was on water, and Cecilia was in charge for carrying out 25 studies for the UNDP from different parts of the world. And one of the questions they asked our center to do the study was, which city in the world has the best water supply? The best water supply in the world. And of course, we looked at the literature. Nobody has done a study. We really don't know, but our initial thinking was, well, we are talking of a best water supply, so it must be in the West. Okay. It must be somewhere in Europe or USA or Japan, somewhere in the Western world. So we were looking at it, and then one of my friends who used to be in Singapore, but at that time he was in University of California in Berkeley. So I met him in Stockholm, and he said, Singapore's water management, urban water management, quite good. Take a look at it. And by that time, we had about 3 weeks left by which we had to produce the study. And we were in Spain at that time, so one night I looked in Google, who is the head of Singapore's water agency. So I found his name, his email. I sent him a note saying that, look, this is our assignment. A friend said, we should look at Singapore. I have no idea what Singapore does, but we are willing to take a look, but for that I need some information. Can you please provide the following info? Are you willing to provide the following information? Next morning, because of the time difference, next morning when I got up in Spain, there was a note from him saying they are very interested, they will provide us all the information. And they said, when do you want it? I said, we don't have very much time, send it, I need it within a week. Within a week, information came. When I saw the information, I have a short fuse. I make no excuses for it. I have a very short fuse. I don't care whether you are the Prime Minister or Chief Minister. I am a scientist. I don't want any favor. So if you say you are going to do something, I have no problem telling a Prime Minister or somebody else, you said you are going to do this, you didn't do that. So I saw what the information he sent. I sent him a very caustic note. I said, you wasted 1 week of my time. If you did not want to give me information, that was fine, but I took your yes in good faith, and yet you sent an information which I could have found in 20 minutes in the web. So you didn't have to take 1 week even to do that. You really didn't give me any information. I wrote a very strong note to him. Half an hour after that, somehow he found out my telephone number in Spain. He called me. He apologized. He said, my staff prepared the data. I did not look at it. Give me 3 days. I'll send you all the information you want. 3 days later, I got all the information I wanted. And then Cecilia did the analysis, and she came to the conclusion it is one of the best. We really cannot say which city is the best, because there are so many cities in the world which nobody has looked at it. We said it is one of the best, because as scientists we cannot say, and also it depends what performance indicators you are looking for in the urban water supply. There is a whole lot of performance indicators, and in many cases they are at the top, some cases they are in the middle, but overall they are quite good, one of the best. And that is how we got involved with Singapore, not on the right footing. So we wrote our report to UNDP, and we did the case study of Singapore, and then he invited us. We were in Tokyo. He invited us to give some speech, give a lecture in Singapore. But the reason I am telling you that Singapore is very different to India. It is the only country I know in the entire world where its MPs are headhunted. Okay? Just like a private sector, if you want to be an MP, you don't join the party. You can join the party, but you will remain a functionary at a, you can go up to middle level, but you will never become an MP or minister. The reason PAP, the Singapore's party, has stayed in power, because they have been constantly showing it to the people they are improving their lifestyle, standard of living regularly. Okay? Nobody ever complains that its election is fraud or manipulated. Nobody, even the worst enemies, ever claim. They are elected because people see the results. There are extremely poor people in 1965. Now it's one of the, on per capita GDP, it's one of the richest in the world. And this happened not because by chance, but because of planning. If this is the only country I know where there are scouts, nobody knows who the scouts are. Their job is to find people between 35 to 45 in the public sector, in the private sector, in the academia, in the army, it does not matter where, who are extremely bright and who have potential. And once, supposing the scout catches you, then one of the young junior minister will call you and say, we've been looking, you may not know, but we've been watching you. We think you have very good potential, but do you want to come and have a chat with us, because we want to seriously consider the possibility of being an MP. Okay? You may have never thought about going into politics, never, but they call you there. So you go there and they tell you, they know everything about you by that time. They have all your background information, everything available, and Singapore is a country where you have no secrets. Okay? No secrets. They know everything about you. So they say, your performance is good, you can make a contribution to the country, would you be interested to run as an MP? And the other thing they tell you, that if you want to become an MP, we will give you a safe seat. where even a dog catcher will be elected as MP. It's so safe, you don't have to worry. So, we guarantee your election the first time, but the second time we will move you to another seat where you have to compete. And if you fail, that means our selection was not the best, you did not perform, thank you very much, you are gone. Yeah. So, that is the way the system works. The second thing is, Kuan Yew said that in order to run a country, you need the best men and women available. Okay? And he said, with a smile, he told us, if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys, and monkeys cannot run a country. So, there is not a single minister in Singapore, a small city state, who gets less than $1 million. Less than $1 million. It comes as a surprise to you. The chief executive of the Public Utilities Board gets at least $1 million. I don't know what his salary is, but I would be surprised if it is less than $1 million. Okay? So, they get the best brains available and they encourage them to stay. So, you can't. So, all of the Indian chief ministers, they come and see Singapore. I tell them that don't waste your time, because the situation is very different. Situation is very different. The ministers are bright. The 3 water ministers I worked with, I've worked with so far 3 water ministers. The first one is a gentleman called Yaakob Ibrahim. He is a Bachelor of Civil Engineering from National University of Singapore. Then he did a master's at Chicago, PhD in Stanford, then working with a company in a very senior position when the scouts came and said, would you like to be an MP? Okay. He had no idea he wanted to be an MP, but they put it in such a way, you will be doing a country a great favor, you owe it to the country, but anyway he got persuaded and he became an MP. The second minister I worked with is Vivian, his name is Indian fellow, Vivian Balakrishnan, the best doctor National University of Singapore medical system has produced. By early 40s, he was the head of the Singapore General Hospital, the biggest hospital in Singapore. So, the scouts came calling on him, say, would you like to join? Would you like to come as an MP? So, he became an MP. The one I am working now, a Malaysian of descent, Masagos Zulfikri. He was the CEO of Singapore Telecom, CEO. He had no idea he wanted to be a politician, okay, until he was called. They are extremely bright, extremely competent, and I can tell you, if they trust you, sky is the limit. If I sent any of the ministers, I have been working with 3 now, any of the ministers, an email before 7 in the morning, I know between 7 and 9 they clear their emails, not their flunkies. Okay? They clear their own email, and their email is public. It is available in the web, anyone can write to them, and they will, most of the time they will respond to it directly. They do not write you a long email. If I send him an email before 7, if they are in town, with a 99.99% probability, I will get a response by 9 a.m. It won't be very much saying, if whatever I am saying, he might say, yes, I like what you are saying, let us have lunch together, or let us meet to discuss it further, but he would respond. Now, let me compare that with India. Well, when Mr. Modi became the Prime Minister, he appointed a lady called Uma Bharati as the water minister of India. I am telling you, these are my experience, maybe I am an exception. So, at one time I was coming to Delhi. A week before, I called his secretary, said, I am coming to Delhi. I would like to see the minister, because many of the things he is doing, I have serious reservations. Okay? I do not agree with many of the things he is doing. So, I would like to discuss with her. And said, can you send me a letter? I said, if I send you a letter, it will take 5 days to get you, and I am coming next week. He said, can I send her email? He said, sir, she never reads her email. Okay. So I said, okay, let's see what I can do. So I started scratching my head. I said, how do I send? I'm sitting in Singapore. How do I get a lady a letter, physical letter, in the same day? And I said, aha, I advised some of the CEOs of the multinational corporations in Delhi. So if I sent a note to Mahabharati and send it to one of my clients and tell him to print the letter, ask his driver to take the letter, deliver to Mahabharati's office, so she will have something positive, take a look. So I did that, and I called the CEO of Nestle, and I said, look, can you do that? He said he would be delighted to. And 2 hours later he calls back, your letter has been delivered. Okay. Believe me, that was the last thing I heard. My letter was delivered. I never heard from Mahabharati. Never, ever. Only time they want you is for public relations purposes. They want to tell you everything they are doing is great. Unfortunately, that is not. I cannot say that. As a scientist, I have to tell you what I think, not what you want to hear. If you want to hear what you want to, if you want to hear that everything you are doing is good, my thesis is very simple. Don't ask a scientist, hire a public relations person. They will make whatever you are saying in a very fancy way, even better than the minister herself. So that is the difference between the quality of people we have in Singapore and here, Singapore and India. How do we change that? People were asking, again, one person yesterday asked me, we don't have good politicians or not committed politicians. This is true, but sometimes things happen. And I want to share with you what happened in Sao Paulo, because yes, I think you are mentioning politics. Water is politics. Yes, water is politics, no question about it. Water is emotion, water is politics, water is corruption, water is everything. In Sao Paulo is a state and also a city. The governor of the state of Sao Paulo 5 years ago decided only way they can improve Sao Paulo's water supply system is divorcing it from politics, that the government has nothing to do. Yeah. So what he did, and this is, remember, Brazil is as a developing country as we are, so it's nothing. So what he did is very simple. He said, we will appoint a regulator with very strict instructions what the regulator can do and what he can authorize. Price increase, if the regulator says yes, no politician has any say. Okay? The regulator decides what is best, how best to run the water supply company, and what are the parameters within which it would be run. Okay? So this governor made that, and then he said, how do we make a good water supply company? First thing he said that we don't have enough money. Most of the water is a very expensive business, especially wastewater treatment, very expensive. Okay. Water supply is comparatively easy, but wastewater treatment is very expensive. So, what he did is a very enlightened man. What he did is he said, okay, we will have a public private partnership. State of Sao Paulo will own 50.4% of the Sao Paulo Water Authority, majority 50.4%, and the private sector would own 49.6%. Okay. So, the state is the main owner of the company. However, he was smart enough to see that the government will not appoint the chief executive of the water company. Even though the private sector was the junior partner, it is for you to decide who is going to run the company. The government has no say. If you select him to be the CEO of the Sao Paulo Water Authority, the government will have to accept it, because their thinking was private sector is putting in the money, government is not putting any money, government is broke. So, if the private sector is getting the money, putting in the money, so they will be looking after their own interest so that they get it back. So, if they want you, who am I to say no? Now, see what has happened in Sao Paulo in the 5 years. From the year 1, they have been making a profit. They have been making a profit, not like Delhi Jal Board with mirrors and smokes. Okay. From year 1, they have been making a profit, and each year the profit has been going up, and government gets half of that profit for doing nothing, absolutely nothing. Private sector runs it. The company is listed in the Sao Paulo Stock Exchange, New York Stock Exchange. Government just sits there and rake in the money. Every year they get more money from the company's profit, and they don't spend a single cent. Okay. And the company is responsible for everything. So, they go to the market, borrow the money. So, all their investment funds come from the private sector, Inter-American Development, the World Bank, etc. That is their job, or from whatever place they want, but they don't get a single cent of subsidy from the municipality, not a single cent. Okay. So, before, Sao Paulo was spending a lot of its money, but delivering a poor service. Now, Sao Paulo has 24/7 clean water supply, which you can drink straight from the tap, no problem at all. And the Tietê River, the main river that goes to the Sao Paulo, is called Tietê River. I had not been to Sao Paulo for about 6 years, and we went back in March. We went back. The first thing I noticed from when you land in the Sao Paulo airport and come to the city, you literally come along the side of the Tietê River. The highway is along the river. And the first thing I told Cecilia, that's very strange that I don't smell the Sao Paulo river, because before it was a stinking river. You could smell it 2 kilometers even before you come to the river. It was like an open drain. Now, quality is probably still poor, but it doesn't smell anymore. So, that means they are making progress. There was no aquatic life in that river, completely dead, because the pollution was so heavy, nothing could survive. In Mars, everyone got excited because they found one small fish, one small fish, but everyone got excited saying this is the sign of something happening. So, nothing was available, but there's one small fish appeared from somewhere, and the whole city was excited that our river is getting better. But it is getting better. First, the smell is not there. Fish is probably will come back slowly, but again this was not any dogmatic decision. The governor could not care less whether it was a public sector or private sector who runs the Sao Paulo water supply company.
Sir, they have published anywhere what was like how they have proceed for this carrying capacity of the rivers, because this is the major problem in our urban rivers. The people, they are very much interested to know what is my health of the river.
Yes.
Basically.
What basically doing?
What that we know, what more can be done.
Yes. What basically they are doing is, they said, why the river is dead? Because it's a sewer canal. Yes, everything gets dumped. It's the industrial waste that's get dumped. It's the drains that are coming all over, dumping that. He said, if we stop the drains and the industrial waste to come, it will automatically improve. So this is what they have done so far. They have not spent any money on carrying capacity or anything. They are basically saying, very simple thing. If you reduce the input or eliminate the input of waste coming in, river will automatically regenerate. Okay. So as the waste input to the river has been dramatically reduced, the quality of the water is improving.
Here in India, the main problem is, like everybody is saying my water is treated, I am discharged, and the very difficult to monitor from which nobody is saying that I have discharged the polluted water in the river. That's the problem. So we have to create some kind of a mechanism.
So what they have done is, all the small municipalities or all the domestic water supply, domestic people that are discharging, they simply close the drain. Simply close the drain, and made sure who was responsible looks after that. The industry, they are monitoring it, checking. They started with the big industries, saying, what are you doing? That all your waste is contained within the factory wall.
So basically, we should also start characterizing the waste which is coming, the load and
so basically, they said only way to reduce it and eliminate it is to stop the discharge of waste product to the river. There's no other choice. So this is what they're doing. So they're not spending too much money on research, doing the carrying capacity, and we see the results that slowly it is coming back. First the smell is gone. Now this one fish has come. Hopefully 5 years, 3 years down the line, 20, 50, 60 fishes will come, but slowly things are changing. So this is what they're doing. So far they're not spending any time doing much academic research, because this is a very private company, private company. They are interested to save money, and they are interested to make the maximum profit. And the good thing is, if they make maximum profit, more than half goes to the city of Sao Paulo, because they are majority, 50.4% holder. So this is just one example, but they had a drought in 2014, 2015. Sao Paulo had a big drought. And quite interesting thing is how they coped with the drought. They have 3 major reservoirs. One was completely, almost dry, completely dry. The biggest reservoir was completely dry. And they went to the people and said that you have to reduce your consumption. If you don't reduce your consumption, we have no choice, but the water is going to run out from the other 2 reservoirs, and then water rationing until the next rain comes, if it comes, when it comes. What became the topic of conversation of Sao Paulo, over 20 million people, is everyday conversation. What is the reservoir level, other 2 reservoirs? You look at the news, says first item in the news, the reservoir level is this, reservoir level is this, first item of the news. Yeah. So everyone became for the first time aware water is an important issue. Now, other thing that interests us is because it had an independent regulator, the Sao Paulo Water Authority went to the regulator and said there is no other choice but to increase price of water, so that people start conserving. So, they increased, the regulator agreed. So, no politician involved, the regulator had the authority, and they convinced the regulator this is the way to go, and regulator approved. So, the price of water increased, but that was just one part. The second part they did, quite interesting, which I have not seen anywhere in the world. And remember, Sao Paulo is as big as Delhi, and it is a city. Sao Paulo, other interesting thing they did is their information database is remarkable. If you are a consumer, you know exactly, they know exactly how much water you are using. They have the record. And after increasing the price, the thing they found most interesting, that even after the price increase, 19% of the people were using more water than ever before, or the year before. Okay. The price increased, but 19% were increasing more water. And they started analyzing who are these 19 people, 19% of the people who are using more water. Roughly 10% were very poor people, using less than, the household using less than 10 meter cube per month, and their consumption went up a little, but they get subsidized water. So they took out the 10%, but that left 9% of the people who were using more water for the corresponding month than the year before. So, for these 9% of the people, what they said is, you can't use more water. If you want to use more water, be my guest, but you pay, what is your bill, plus since you are using more, you have to pay 40% surcharge on your bill because you are using more water than before. Okay. 40% surcharge for using more water than before. Half of them stopped using. The other half did not make much difference. Obviously, rich people did not make difference. They said, fine, you want to use more water even after this 40% surcharge, but from now on your surcharge rate would be 100%. So, you paid 100% your bill, 100% surcharge. So, in 1 year, in fact, in 15 months, their per capita consumption went down from 145 liters per person per day to 120 liters per person per day. Now, figure it out, 20 million people, 25 liters savings, how much water savings that happened. The drought is over, it has gone up a little, it is about now 121, 122, but it is not gone up to 145. Now, the other interesting Sao Paulo did, which again we have never seen anywhere, is the way they made people aware of importance of water. 70% of people in Sao Paulo are Catholics. So, the head of Sao Paulo is an old friend of mine of 30 years, Sao Paulo Water Authority. He went to the Bishop of Sao Paulo, explained to him all the problems. He said, I need your support to make people aware the importance, because you are the Bishop of Sao Paulo, you are the head of the community, the Christian community here. If you say you must reduce water, you tell them importance of water, they are likely to hear more from you as a spiritual leader than me as the CEO of what they call Sao Paulo Water Authority. So, the bishop wrote a letter to all the priests of all the churches in Sao Paulo, so that they started preaching in the church the importance of water conservation. Okay? Not one time, several times. Every Sunday they started saying it's important for you to preserve water, conserve water. So, I have not seen that anywhere else. Then also what this group, they have a public relations group in this sub-west, this water authority. I have never seen a single communication or public relations group of any water utility anywhere in the world. Maybe there is some, I don't know, where they have a expertise which is unthinkable somewhere else. One of the experts in this communication group is a neurobiologist, not a communication expert, but a neurobiologist. He knows which message gets to people. For a company, water company, to hire a neurobiologist in the communication group, to me, it's the first stage. And what he did is quite interesting. What they've done is quite interesting. One of the things he did, this guy has done, is for the youngsters these days, there's a music in Sao Paulo. I don't know. I'm not a music fan. They call it funk. Okay, some form of music. And so they had the most famous funk singer who did it as a public service, did a very catchy tune on the importance of water conservation. And they put it like you are doing in this lecture on the YouTube, and they had about 8 million hits within a couple of weeks. Then they went to a person who specialized in making comic books. Again, free of cost, they did a couple of comic books for kids on importance of water conservation, how you should conserve water. And the bishop wrote a personal letter to all the priests saying, please distribute this comic book to all the children that come to your church, all the children and the parents who come to their church. So, the way they made water a topic of conversation is absolutely remarkable. I have not seen this type of effort in any city. So, we have to start thinking about, most of us are engineers. In the water profession, most of us are engineers. Virtually all over the world is the same thing. We don't think of much about communication, nor do we know how to communicate. Okay? And yet, yesterday I mentioned name of one of my professors here, an absolutely remarkable man at IIT Kharagpur, who was my soil mechanics professor, called B.N.S. Murthy. And he told us a story which I still remember to this day. Okay? These professors I had are really remarkable. They made a lot of impact, at least on my career, on my thinking, and I still very fondly remember the story. And it's not a story in the sense of story, it's a real thing that happened in the world. And he was trying to show us that, Professor Murthy was trying to show us, his students, that when you talk of a problem, the moment you say it's an engineering problem or an economic problem or a social problem or a political problem, he told us that only shows your bias. You are an engineer, so you look at the problem from an engineering background. You are an economist, you won't look at the engineering point, you look at the economic point. You are a scholar of politics, you look at the whole thing from the politics side. And he told us the story of on the Second World War. And those of you, I found out the story in a book also, one of the early books on operations research by Russell Eckhoff. If you have time, read this book. It's a small book, but very wonderful. And what happened is, during the Second World War, there was a lot of bombing of London. You know, Germany and England were at war, so they are bombing heavily London, and many of the civils many of the offices of the civil servant were badly damaged, okay, by bombs. So they moved the damaged people working the damaged building to the buildings that are still standing. And the person responsible for the building started getting a lot of complaint from the people using that building. They said, look, if I have to go from the 12th floor to see my colleague on the 3rd floor, I have to wait half an hour for the elevator to go down, half an hour to go up. I may need 5 minutes with that person, but I spend 1 hour waiting for the damn lift or the elevator to come up or go down. So he got a lot of complaints. So he brought in, he was an engineer, of course, because he was responsible for the building. So this chief engineer brought in his other people saying, this is the problem, give us a solution. And the engineer's solution was predictable. He says, well, if you have a problem, put more lifts, okay. If people are waiting, if you have more lifts, the waiting time goes down, right? He said, huh? Engineering solutions. And so they came to this guy and said, sir, we need more lifts. He said, you must be joking. People are already overcrowded. They are literally sitting on each other's lap. And you are saying we are going to make more lift shafts to take out more space. You would be lynched alive. If I give this solution, they will kill me alive. Okay? Again, next problem. It is an old building. To make a lift shaft in an old building will be a tremendously expensive process and a long term process. He said, it is not a feasible solution, go and find something else. So they went and scratched their head, our engineer's friend scratched their heads, and they came saying, we will use the batching system of the lifts. Batching system means 1 to say floor 1 to 6, these 2 lifts will go, 7 to 10 or 7 to 12 this. He said, okay, we do that, that is no problem, we will do that. How much time will it save? He said, sir, it will save about a minute. He said, whether somebody waits 30 minutes or 29 minutes, it does not make any difference. So, and this said, any other solution? So, sir, there are no other solution, none at all. So, that night by coincidence, one of his friends came to dinner. He was coming to dinner anyway, but came to dinner. He was saying he is stuck with a problem which does not have a solution. And so his friend said, what is the problem? His friend happened to be a psychologist. He listened to it. He said, I can solve your problem in 3 days. It cost you all of 75 pounds. Remember, it was 1942, 75 pounds was really significant sum of money, but not enormous amount of money, 75 pounds. He said, what will you do? He said, don't worry, give me, you trust me as a friend? He said, yes, give me 75 pounds, I will solve it. So, 2 days later, his friend comes, and he was, and this fellow was watching. He came with the people who brought a lot of mirrors, and this engineer's reaction was, he knew all the psychologists were crazy, but his friend was crazier than the most. He said, 75 pounds gone, but he is my friend. Okay, I tried it, nothing happened. He forgot all about it. Then a month later, he realized there is no complaints. Nobody complains that they had to wait half an hour coming up or going down. Huh? So he called his friend. I said, I don't understand what you did. I don't know what happened, but the complaints have completely disappeared. Explain to me what you did or what is the logic behind it. So his friend explained to him, he said, you are an engineer. Your objective function was to reduce the waiting time. Okay? This is what you are trying to do. If the lifts take long time, your waiting time, how do you reduce the waiting time? I am a psychologist. I don't go do those type of things. What I want to do is to how do I make waiting time more interesting and productive. Okay? He said, all you did was to put some damn meters. How did the waiting time become most productive and interesting? He said, I'll come to you and show it to you what is happening. So he came here. He said, take a look what is happening. He couldn't understand. He said, people are still waiting. He said, no, no, no. You are an engineer. You're looking at people. They're waiting. Yes, but what are they doing? After a while, they realized very simple thing. There are mirrors all over there in the waiting room, and in the lift area. Ladies took this opportunity to put on lipsticks and powders and what have you, and the men who did not want to look at the ladies directly were quite happy to look at it, the ladies in the mirror. So both the sexes were productively occupied, and nobody complained about this. And Venus Murthy explained to us the moral of this story. The problem is a problem. If you call it an engineering problem, you are showing it the engineering bias. If you are calling it an economic problem, you are showing it economic bias. You do not know whether this problem could be best solved by a psychologist or a philosopher or politics. So he was trying to tell us that, for heaven's sake, try to look beyond engineering. Keep your minds open. Work with other disciplines, because they may have a better answer than you. And that, in the 1950s, late 1950s, was a remarkable statement from a university professor. It took me 20, 30 years to realize the wisdom of Venus Murthy. So I was lucky to have professors like this, and those stories, even though when I first heard more than 60 years ago, is still fresh in my mind, that a priori you cannot say the solution is going to be engineering. A priori you cannot say it will be economic or sociological or psychological. You have to think, you have to discuss with your colleague. Maybe somebody else could have a better solution than a technical solution. So this is what I need to think about in the water side. In my view, most of the new developments we are going to see in the future in the urban water side will be coming not from technology. They will be making a contribution. I am not saying there will be no contribution from technology. There will be contribution from technology and contribution. But the biggest contribution, I am convinced, is going to come from the behavioral sciences. How do we get people to use less water? Not because we don't need less water, we don't need as much water to live and live a productive life. How do I convince the people that you should use less water? It has to come from the behavioral sciences. Pricing will do some, but not enough. But how do you do that? And as I'm mentioning, how do we attract behavioral scientists to our profession?
You can share your thought, like
yes,
from different parts of the country. So tell us, like Sir said, water pricing is one of the.
It is an essential one, but not the only one.
People are very rich. They said, okay, 500 also is nothing for me.
Yeah.
So what could be the solution for?
How do we get people to do that? There have been some studies in US, a few occasional studies in US, where they ask people if you are using recycled, if a utility is using a recycled water, now if you put in the reservoir, will you use it if that water stays for 1 day? Will you use it if water stays for 20 days, 40 days, 60 days? 1 day, nobody wants to use it. But 20 days, half the people said 20 days doesn't sound so bad, maybe we will use it. 40 days, most of them says okay, they will use it. Why? It doesn't make any difference when you put the water in the reservoir in 1 day or 2 days or 20 days or 40 days. Same goes, they asked a whole bunch of questions, not only water. One was, say, if Hitler had a sweater, if Hitler, you know, Hitler of Germany had a sweater, if Hitler wore this sweater, and I will get it dry cleaned very properly, would you wear it? Okay. Would you wear Hitler's sweater? No American, or at least 200 people they asked, he asked, none of them will wear the sweater. Dry clean, everything else, no way. Then the next question he asked was, okay, the Hitler wore this sweater. We cleaned it. We cleaned it properly. Then we gave it to Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa wore it for 2 years. But this sweater is Hitler's first, Mother Teresa's second, and then we clean it. Will you wear it? Everyone said, yes, we'll wear it. Because same sweater Hitler wore, somehow when Mother Teresa wore, it changed. Its idea changed. So one of the things from this we can say is what he called theory of contagion. Theory of contagion means if a wastewater, if something bad is mixed with something good, the good somehow picks up the bad qualities of the wastewater. So the wastewater, even though it is cleared, even though it is clean, it still contains the contagion theory. People still think because it was contagion before, contaminated before, it is still not so good. So we need many theories now to look into this type of things. How we behave, why we behave, can we do something about this? So these are some of the issues we need to face in the future. Why does a Delhiite need 220 liters and demand 220 liters to live better? Well, whether he or she uses 220 or 120 doesn't make any difference. Why? We don't have answers. But people think, in the same goes irrigation. Most of the farmers you go, they think more water you put, more crops will go. Okay? But it's a fact that most of the time, depending on the growing status of the crop, in some growing stages, the water is not necessary at all. Not necessary at all. Whether you put water or not, it won't make any difference. But all the farmers think that more water you put in the crop, you have good crop. I went to Punjab 5 years ago to look at some industrial water use, and I found many of the irrigation fields that are growing wheat completely flooded, completely flooded. And so I was trying to find out, I stopped the car and trying to find out why the wheat fields are flooded. Finally, one farmer explained to me that, sir, his daughter is getting married. So he has gone away to his daughter's wedding. But just to make sure his wheat is not short of water, he decided to flood it completely, so that the 10 days he will be away, nothing much will happen. Okay? So probably he did more harm to the wheat than good, but the people think more water you put the crops, better it will happen. How do we take these things out of the brain, of the human brain? How do we make people understand that putting more water does not mean increased crop? It has to be put in the right growing time, growing season, and after that you may not need any water. In fact, you can do some art. The same with people. How do you convince people you don't need even 120 liters, but 75 to 80 liters is enough for us if you use it properly. If you use kitchen garden, etc., I am not using that. I mean, if you use it outside, as we discussed in our other outside, if you want to wash your car, well, that has to be extra. But for the human needs, 75 to 80 liters is enough. So how do I convince you and the others that 75 to 80 liters is enough? So those are not going to come from us, the engineers. This will come from the behavioral scientists, social psychologists, behavioral economists. And unfortunately, this group do not see any prospect of a career in the water field, so they don't come into the water field. So globally, if you ask me how many people do I know who are behavioral psychologists or behavioral sociologists who are working in the water field, I'll say zero. I don't know a single person from that area who is working in the water field as a carrier. But this is what I think will be needed in the future. How do we bring in these people so they can complement the skills we have, in the engineering skills we have? But I don't see any much progress here anywhere in the world. What will happen, I do not know. But I am convinced that behavioral scientists have a major role to play in water management in the coming years. So that is one of the things I wanted to leave with you, that solution may not be technical, and we don't know beforehand where specific solutions might come from, and we need to keep our minds open. If somebody gives us a better solution, it does not matter which profession, which discipline it comes from, accept it. Okay, enough talking. Any questions? Yes.
You said that the drains were shut off for the Sao region, draining the river. So where did they redirect that domestic waste?
Domestic waste, they had no choice but to treat it. There is no redirection allowed. They said it cannot go, you have to look after. Either you put it in the drains, let us go to our sewage treatment plant, but you cannot put it in the drains. So they basically closed it. Industry, they made it a rule that it has to be treated within the four walls, and they are very strict at that. And again, as you are mentioning, monitoring was an important issue. And somebody at the back was, yeah.
So during the independence of Singapore in 1965, for the implementation, what was the policies, from where they got funding, and what was the source for the economy in 1965?
The
Starting period.
interesting thing in Singapore, one thing we have found out, nothing is free in Singapore. Nothing is free in Singapore. I asked Lee Kuan Yew. I came to know Cecilia and I came to know Lee Kuan Yew very well. And I'll tell you another story. The first time we went to meet Lee Kuan Yew, he was a legend. Okay, everybody knew about Lee Kuan Yew. He was a legend in Singapore, legend in the world. We were told many things, that he's a very tough person, has a very short fuse. Apparently, a couple of interviews he gave, after 10 minutes he got up and said, you are wasting my time, this interview is over. So we are given whole bunch of things. When we went to see him, we didn't know what to expect, because by the time he was like a god in Singapore. So the first 10 minutes we didn't know what was. We listened to him, but Then something happened which changed the dynamics completely. He said something, and as a scientist, I had to tell him, with due respect, I don't agree with you. You could see his body language, he stiffened up. He asked me, why? Why don't you agree with me? Does it not make sense? I said, no, it doesn't make sense. 1, 2, 3 reasons. I gave it to him, what I thought, why I disagreed with him. Number 1, 2, 3. He thought about it and he said, I think your second point has some merit. I'm not sure of the first and third, but then he came back with some more argument. Then after 90 minutes, the meeting was supposed to be for 60 minutes. After 90 minutes, he said, look, there are many things we wanted to discuss, or you wanted to discuss. You told me you will be discussing. We have not even seen half of, we have not discussed even half of them. When can you come next? I said, sir, you are the busy man. You tell me when. He said, what about tomorrow? Then I started thinking. He didn't know me. He didn't know me at all. Okay. Why did he got impressed by us? I came to the conclusion, very simple thing, that like most other educated people, he likes to argue, okay? But he is considered as put in such a pedestal, nobody dared to argue with him. Whether they agree with him or not, they say, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir. This is the first time probably in 20, 15 years, somebody said, he did not agree, I did not agree with him, which made him to take notice, who is this guy? And he enjoyed it. Like all scientists, we like arguments. And especially he's a lawyer, he was a lawyer. And that set up, that simple question, simple answer, looking back, that I said, I don't agree with you. We had an argument. That put us in a completely different category. So he said in public several times, he said, I know this guy, if he's Biswas, if he says something, go and do it. And only reason I think was because I dared to argue with him. So the moral of the story again, I always say, be respectful, but if you do not agree, say gently, you don't agree with the person. Why? We are all intelligent person. My father used to say, my father was a very, not my father, my mother was a very intelligent lady. And she used to say, son, if 2 persons agree on everything, be sure that only one of them is doing the thinking. Okay? If you agree with everything I say, something wrong something wrong with you. Probably 80% of the things, I'm quite sure, probably 80% of things Dr. Gupta and I'll agree. 20% will disagree for our background, our knowledge. There's nothing wrong with it. He can convince me I am wrong. I can convince him. I can try to convince him he's wrong. Or we can both be convinced both of us are right and both of us, the other person is wrong. There's nothing wrong to be, to me, to disagree is not wrong. And one of the biggest problem I see in the world now is the political correctness. If I tell my colleagues at LKY school, the younger colleagues, I don't agree with you, you can see their reaction. Yeah? They don't expect a scientific discussion or a technical discussion, an honest disagreement, because everything is not neither white nor, probably 10% of the things are white, 10% are black, okay? 80% are gray. So you can have a different opinion, I can have a slightly different opinion. But that doesn't mean I don't like you or you don't like me. We differ on an idea. We differ on an idea. It has nothing to do with whether my likeness, but unfortunately in this world, when you say you don't agree, they take it personally. And yet that was the entry I got with Kuan Yew. We became lifelong friends after that, only because I am convinced, only because I told him I don't agree with him. So when I have many students, I encourage them to tell me if they think I am wrong, tell me I am wrong. I have no problem with that, but tell me why you think I am wrong. That is the most important part. If you convince me I am wrong, I will have no difficulty standing up and say you are right, I am 100% wrong. Okay, it's only truth is what it matters. So I always encourage my students or people all to tell everything honestly but respectfully. Don't be aggressive. I mean, just say that you are a bloody idiot, you don't know anything. You are making sure that person is not listening. Respectfully say that I disagree with you for 1, 2, 3 reasons, and then I give you the opportunity to tell me if my reasoning is right or wrong. So you come back to me and saying, no, 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 you are wrong with your reasoning, and you say for the following reason I am wrong. So we have a discussion, and then maybe we can meet halfway, maybe we don't meet, but agreeing to disagree is not a problem. I don't have a problem. I have many times, many of my students, they come from different parts of the world. They don't agree with me on everything, but I don't try to impose my views on them, because they come from a different culture, different climate, different conditions. So their solution may be better than mine, but I may not just simply know the conditions under which he or she has come to that conclusion. So those are something we need to think about. Respect for each other, but don't be a yes man or a yes woman. That's the worst thing I like when somebody says, there was a diplomat in Singapore, very, very powerful man. He doesn't speak to me anymore, because at one of the lectures I gave, he said, I agree with you, I agree with all your statements. And I told him in public what my mother has said, that if 2 of us agree on everything, only one of them is doing the thinking. And since then he hasn't spoken to me. Okay, but that is his problem, not my problem. I told him the truth, what I think is the truth. If you want to be polite, be my guest, but you don't impress me. So that's the way. That's the way I work. If I don't agree, I'll tell you I don't agree and why I don't agree. And the same, if you don't agree with me, I want you to say politely and respectfully you don't agree and why, and then let's have a discourse. So unfortunately, it's become a debating discussions, regrettably, has become a dying art. I miss it very much. Like Kuan Yew, very few people dares to argue with me, and I miss it very much, because what I like most is a good argument, because that forces me to sharpen my ideas, that forces me to think what I think in certain way, which most of the time I hadn't given much thought to. So if you force me to defend my ideas, my brain works overtime and very quickly to defend what I am saying, to make a logical conclusion, and that to me is the best way to proceed. Okay, so
if you have any
please.
yes, please.
Are you in any way related to the smart city plan that the government of India has come up with?
I have a slight difference with the government of India's smart city program. Everyone is talking about the smart city. So I am assuming if there is a smart city, there is also a dumb city. Okay. Smart city, all it means in the current lexicon, not only in India but all over the world, lot of sensors, lot of IT, human beings disappear from the city. If you can't provide 24-hour electricity, to get all your sensors, all your lights working, how on earth are you going to make cities smart? If you can't provide water 24/7, what do you mean by smart city? City cannot be smart. It's the people who have to be smart.
So in the preliminary notes that have come up on the smart city initiative, there is obviously there is a part on water also. So are you in any way related to the designing or the future prospects of the designing of the water supply systems of any of the provinces in the smart city initiative?
The problem I have in India, as a scientist, I have to tell you what I think, and they don't like it. If I don't say what you are doing is right, I am persona non grata. And my personality is that I don't care who it is, I cannot tell you I agree with you 100%. As I said, 80% of the things probably will agree and 20% will disagree, but I have to say that is the problem. Once you take a politician, an Indian politician, that something he or she is doing is not the right path. I have a problem. 2 weeks ago I was in Indore because UN and the government of India did a meeting on reuse, 3R, reuse, recycle and reduce, reuse and recycle, okay? And they are all talking about waste to energy plants. And Indore, the chief minister of MP was saying how many waste to energy plants they have created, they have built and how many they are going to build. I don't know why UN asked me to come, but I had to tell them that how many of the waste to energy plants you built 3 years ago are still working, okay? Because I did my homework before I go to a meeting. I did my homework. 19 of the 20 waste to energy plants MP built 20 years ago, 19 of them are not working, okay? And yet they are going ahead building whole bunch of other waste to energy plants without figuring out why did the 19 are not working. Then the question, very simple question I asked is, in Singapore before we built waste to energy plant, we did 3 years of research on the quality of ash, because when you burn the products in Singapore, still 16% is left as ash. Before we get rid of, we have to find out its chemical composition, its hazardousness, whole bunch of, we have to do 3 years of research and then how to dispose of it. They have no idea what is the ash content, they have no idea where the ash is, how the ash is being distributed. So the issue is the same. If you are talking a smart city, you need to think about all aspects of the problem. Just saying that we are going to build smart city is not enough. Look at all the dimensions and see what are the problems, what are the prospects. If you build a smart city with I have a difficulty with a smart city and a livable city. If you give me a choice, I'll rather have a livable city than go to a smart city. For example, I don't want one of Amazon's or Google's Alexa or this in my home. I don't want what time I come, I don't want everything I say is recorded, Google knows what's going on, knows all my personal details. I don't want that. I don't want to be smart. I want to remain dumb but remain in control. I want my information to be with me. The more you go to the smart city, as we are now seeing in the Facebook, all this, the Google, what worries me that if I say something somewhere, Google picks it up, stores it, and that becomes a part of my profile. I want my privacy. So in the smart city, I went to see 2 so-called smart cities. One is Masdar in United Arab Emirates. another is in South Korea, 2 already been built. I went there, very impressive. I asked myself, would I like to live here even for one day? The answer was no. If I want to go to the doctor in Masdar, I don't have a choice which dentist I go to, which doctor I go to. They'll tell you this is where you are located, this is the best doctor. So, they'll make the appointment with that best doctor, and you go to that doctor. I don't want to go to any doctor. I want to go to my own doctor, whom I know, whom I have faith, or my own dentist. I don't care whether he's in half a mile or 20 miles, because I have trust, I have confidence. So, I have difficulty with many of this concept. They look very smart on paper, but for an old timer like me, I'm become extremely conscious of my privacy. I'm extremely conscious of my choices. I don't want the computer to make choices. I don't want the computer to tell me which doctor I can go, which specialist I should go to. I'll rather ask you, have you had a chance to see this doctor, or your father been gone to a doctor? Do you trust him? I'll go by your recommendation if a doctor is good or not, rather than a computer saying that doctor is nearest, that you must go to that doctor, because that's what will provide the transportation. Because in Masdar, you have individual transfers. So, once the computer decides I should go to the doctor, you get on the car, everything is put automatic, the car drives you to his dispensary. Is it smart? Perhaps, but I don't call it livable. So, those are some of the things nobody discusses. I have not seen any discussion in India or anywhere else. Everyone gets carried away with technology. Yes, technology is wonderful, but to a certain extent. So, no, smart city, Gujarat asked me to get involved, I was not very excited. And the other problem with all these smart cities program, they are run by IAS officers, okay? And every 18-20 months they are gone. So, you develop a good rapport, you start working well, and the person is gone, and a new person comes, a completely new ideas. So, there are some very, and this is the same problem in the water area, many other problems. The continuity is a big problem in India. You cannot run a utility where the average stay is 18 months of the chief executive is 18 months. That is impossible. So, smart city is also running from the same problem. And I had a discussion with the former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh about trying to change the IAS officers running the water utilities, whether we could not have headhunt a head of a water utility and get that person 6-7 years to do something done. And the answer was it will be very difficult because of the system. To change the IAS system. If you look at how the system is run, the Prime Minister has got the Private Secretary of Prime Minister, the first PPS, the PS, the 2 or 3 lines there, all IAS officers. Okay? If you say that we are going to get rid of some IAS officers from the Delhi Jal Board, believe me, that piece of paper will never reach the Prime Minister, because IAS people want to have more power, more authority. So we can carry on the discussion tomorrow. So it's not the end. So think of any problem you have, any issues that we will be happy to discuss with you and give you my own unburned opinion. Whether you like it or not, that is immaterial, but we can argue about it.
Thank you. So tomorrow we have 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock. So thank you very much. And some of you have given some questions. So we will discuss. One piece of paper was with me, some questions were asked. We will discuss on those things. Come out with some more technical questions also.
All types of questions.
All type of questions. Okay. So thank you very much. We'll take care.